Hi everyone, I'm Jacob Kaspic and I'm a hobbyist game developer. Today I'm going to show you my quarantine project, a new game prototype I've been working on for about 2 weeks now. In this Dev Diary video, I'm going to talk a little bit about my inspiration for the game, my workflow, including my custom Unity editor tools, and my future plans for the game. But first things first, let's have a look at some gameplay footage. So the title of the game is Mattorium. It's a fast-paced puzzle game about multitasking and atom smashing. Let's take a look at the first level. My intention is to create a nice progression of levels that teaches the game one concept at a time. This first level is a very basic introduction to the core gameplay loop. So every level has one or more input pipes, that's this right here, and as you can see, these colored particles come out of the input pipe, and I'm using these switchers to control where they go. And clicking on the switchers to control the path of the particles basically sums up the main gameplay loop. My goal is to create certain products and get them to the output pipes. In this level there are 3 output pipes, and each one has a filter on it, so it only accepts one color of particle. Normally, there'll be various machines throughout the level that you can use to combine the particles or manipulate them in different ways to create new ones. In this level, the particles that we need come straight out of the input pipe, and our only task is to sort them. There's a very basic interface up here that shows how many particles we've produced versus the quota. For this level it's 12, and how much time we've taken. The goal is to create or fulfill the quota in as little time as possible. So we're just about to finish this here. There we go, level complete. Very easy. So let's move on to the next level. In this level, we're introduced to the first of many machines that we'll be using to create new particles. This machine is called the fuser, and it sticks 2 particles together into clusters. And in this game, you can create clusters of up to 3 colored particles. At the beginning of each level is this dialogue that shows you what the goal products are and what your quota is. So in this level, we'll be creating 12 of any of these clusters. There are 3 new machines introduced in this level. The first are these buffers. So particles enter the buffer, up to 3 particles can be stored in these slots, and I can click the buffer at any time to release one. The next machine is the fuser, which has 2 slots. I put a particle into each of these slots, and it combines them into a cluster. And there we go, I've just made one of the goal products for the level. The third machine introduced in the level is this disposal. This is the only safe place to get rid of unstable particles, which are a waste product that is created when the user makes any sort of mistake. So for example, if I try to put 2 particles in the same slot of the fuser, there's an unstable particle that needs to be disposed of. If I were to accidentally ship an unstable particle in the output pipe, you can see that I get a penalty added to my time for the level. So this is also pretty basic. Let's skip ahead to a more complex level. In this level, the goal products are these clusters of 2 of the same primary color. The input products are single particles of secondary colors. So first I have to send them through this machine called the prism, which separates them into their 2 component primaries, which I can then send to the fusers to complete the goal products. Clicking on the buffers and switchers to control where the particles go is the primary loop of the game. The secondary loop is all about multitasking. Each of the individual steps that you have to take to complete the goal products by itself is very simple. The challenge of the game comes from having to pay attention to lots of different things happening at once. To complement this, another important game mechanic that isn't quite finished yet will be the ability for the player to speed up and slow down time. I find the most interesting game mechanics are ones that force the player to make choices where they have to balance risk versus reward. So as you can see, I've slowed down the game considerably here. This makes it much easier to pay attention to everything that's going on, but your level time still counts up at the same rate, and your score will ultimately suffer. You could also choose to speed up all of the particles in the game, get possibly a much better score, but also risk things going catastrophically wrong. The win and lose conditions for levels also used to be a little different. Originally, I had it set up so that each level had a time limit, and you failed the level if you didn't complete all of the goal products before that limit. I changed it because I find games more interesting when they are accessible to casual players, but still difficult to master. In the previous system, I could imagine a casual player getting frustrated and maybe giving up after repeatedly failing to beat a difficult level. With this new approach, a casual player can take as much time as they need, can make mistakes, and still eventually complete any level, while still leaving plenty of room for a skilled player to challenge themselves and compete for the best times. The inspiration for this game was a game from my childhood simply called Factory. I grew up with Apple computers, back in the era where they looked like this. Most of the popular video games of the day weren't compatible with Macs, so the video games that I grew up with were a motley collection of shareware games. I suppose these would be called indie games in the modern vocabulary. Hundreds of shareware games came bundled together on CDs that looked like this. They were basically free-to-play demos. If you liked them, you sent some money away to the developer, literally by mailing them money in an envelope, and you would receive a serial key to access the full game. Shareware games varied wildly in quality. Some were clearly amateur projects cobbled together with stock game assets, but there were also many hidden gems. Growing up playing such an eclectic variety of games definitely influenced my love of indie games today. Factory was one of my favorites. The gameplay was very similar to Mattorium, only instead of pipes, it was conveyor belts, and instead of colored particles, you were assembling televisions, boxes of cereal, toilets, and all sorts of miscellaneous consumer goods. It was a brilliant, unique game that I think has aged really well. If you have access to an old Mac or an emulator, I'd highly recommend seeking it out. Originally, I considered making a game much closer to Factory. One of the main reasons I decided to go with the more abstract concept of colored particles is because it made content creation much simpler and faster. In Factory, every level you're making a different product with a unique recipe and components, which is very cool, but adds that much more work to the level design. I like that my game has a well-defined set of possible products, and I can devote all my effort into coming up with interesting level layouts within those constraints. This is a good segue into talking about my workflow. I consider myself a perfectionist in recovery. My natural tendency is to get lost in small details, wasting time until eventually losing interest and moving on to the next thing. I know I'm not alone in this. Most of the creative people I've met struggle with the same thing. What works for me is trying to move as fast as possible, basically treating all of my projects like game jams. My aim is to create a working prototype of an idea as fast as possible, so I can learn what works, what can be thrown away, and which details are actually worth spending the time to perfect. My workflow for Mattorium is guided by this philosophy. Fast is best. For example, all of the graphics in the game right now are just made up of Unity primitives, as you can see if I switch to the 3D viewport. They're not pretty, but it means that if I have an idea for a new machine, I can make the graphics for it in a matter of minutes without ever leaving Unity. And now is the part of the video where I climb onto my soapbox and preach about the importance of level editors. Anyone who has met me and talked to me about game development knows that this is kind of my thing. One of the first things I think about when I'm planning any game project is, what is a level in this game? what sort of data makes up the level, and what tools will I use to create and edit them. I even built a level editor for my team's game at Global Game Jam this year. In that case, it was because I wanted the non-programmers of the team to be able to create content for the game. But even for a solo hobby project like Mattorium, I think it's always worthwhile to make one. And I'm being a bit too specific by saying level editor. Really what I'm referring to is any sort of tool for speeding up or automating content creation in a game. So I'll show you the tool that I created for making levels in Mattorium. But first, for contrast, I'll show you how I had to make levels before making the editor. So let's create a new scene here. And we'll open up the entities. Always start a level with a spawner. Let's say we'll make the simplest level possible. Move a spawner over there. Have a goal up here. Now we need to create some pipes. So we start with a pipe coming out of this. Oh, you'll also notice one of the first things I set up were these little gizmos being drawn in the Unity viewport. These red and green gizmos represent the connection points of every entity. Green is an input, red is an output, and they'll disappear once machines are connected. So, put that there. Drag the output up. And now we want a nice curve in this pipe. Let's grab the curved pipe prefab. Oh, looks like it's facing the wrong way, so we need to go into here. Switch this to face right. Now we need another straight pipe. And up here. Another curve. Oh. There we go. Is that lined up right? Yep. Lined it up right on the first try. And now one final pipe. Where is it? There it is. And there we go. We've made a simple level. Except not really, because even though these entities are placed properly in the level, they're not actually connected to each other. So now I would have to go into the spawner, inspect the connections. Okay, it has this output connection. What is it connected to? Right now it's connected to nothing. So I need to find the input of the straight pipe, connect this, and already I'm bored and ready to quit. So let's have a look at the actual level editor. Let's try that again, but this time a little smarter. I'll open up my palette. Let's grab the spawner, switch to the place tool. I have hotkeys that I can use to rotate things. Why don't we make it come from up here this time? Let's have a goal, place it down here, and maybe we want something more interesting to happen. Here's a switcher. Switch to the pipe tool. We'll draw a pipe connecting these, and we'll make a little bigger radius on the curve. And where does this go? I don't know. Up here, 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 here. Oops. Looked like I had the radius set a little bit too high there. Well, that's no problem if you make mistakes with a custom level editor. Perfect. Now this, where does it go? I don't know. Into a prism, perhaps. Which then goes up here. Into a buffer. You get the idea. And you'll notice that as I'm placing things, not only is it placing them in the scene, but it's also wiring everything up behind the scenes. So these little gizmos disappear, which means that all of this is actually connected. Now, let's say we'll choose a sequence of particles to come out. Let's have some nice red, yellow, and blue, orange, purple, and green. And then maybe some unstable particles come out too, just to add a little bit of variety. Now I have a little utility that lets me launch this. And there we go. A functioning level in under a minute. I can't emphasize enough how much of a difference it makes to create tools like this. Not only does it let you work more efficiently, but it makes game development more fun, and especially when you're developing games in your spare time as a hobby, that's kind of the whole point. Anything you can do to remove friction between having an idea for something and actually building it is a worthwhile investment of your time. I'll conclude this video by briefly talking about my future plans for the game. My immediate goal is to have a playable demo. Because the game is so graphically simple, I should have no problem making a Unity WebGL build so people can play it right in the browser. Most of the core mechanics of the game are finished, except for the time control powers, as I mentioned before. Most of the work that's left to do is focused on the UI. I'd like to flesh out the level select menu, and also display people's high scores for each level. I'd also like to do a simple in-game tutorial, basically just a few pop-up boxes that appear in the first couple levels to show the player how to interact with the game. This all sounds simple, but in my experience, it's the little supplementary stuff like this that ends up taking the most time. If the game is well received, my long-term goal is to make a more polished version and publish it for tablets. I think the mechanics of this game make it well suited to being played on a touchscreen. In fact, I think it would be more natural to play that way versus with a keyboard and mouse. And that concludes this dev diary. This is the first time I've ever created something like this, so please let me know what you think in the comments. If there are any aspects of the game or of game design in general that you'd like me to talk about in more depth, I would be happy to do a follow-up video. Thanks for watching.